The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. It's October the 19th, 2025. It's Sunday. Welcome to This Week with Mary Holland and myself at Polly Tommey. Let's kick off with RFK Jr. blasting the Tylenol chugging TikTokers as experts explain why taking acetaminophen during pregnancy may be as risky as drinking alcohol. Experts say not only is this a White House advice on avoiding acetaminophen during pregnancy, it doesn't go far enough. They cited parallels between the potential link between acetaminophen and autism and the link between alcohol consumption during pregnancy and the onset of fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. I mean, I have to say, Mary, it's beyond me to see people doing that. I mean, whether you like Trump or not, or Bobby or not, the Tylenol package itself says it's not advisable to take during pregnancy.
No, the package doesn't say it, Polly. In 2017, Tylenol acknowledged that it wasn't. But I think people have imagined for decades, oh, it's safe to take Tylenol whenever. It's just like, I don't know, popping candy. And I think that Kennedy has really run into this issue that people don't want to believe them. And you're right, there's a whole political dimension that really has no role. So Bobby Kennedy was just saying in a cabinet meeting that there's 15 rodent studies and they all show that it's dose dependent. If you take a lot of Tylenol, your kid is more likely to get autism. If you take less Tylenol, it's less likely. But this is a really interesting article with a very good discussion about the metabolic pathways and how it is similar to alcohol, which is also a spectrum disorder. It's also dose dependent. But it has, comments from Brian Hooker, from William Parker, from Carl Ivanowski, from Chris Exley. And it cites to the mainstream media, Polly, the New York Times, the BBC, all telling people that it's safe to take Tylenol, which is simply false. So I feel really terrible for people who are expecting the mainstream media to tell them the truth about this. We did a great takedown here at CHD, the science department, of the New York Times telling women that it's safe to take Tylenol in pregnancy. It's not. That's not what the science shows, but it's become political, which it is not. This is really about what does the science show? Is it safe or not? And I pray for the babies of people taking Tylenol right now.
Okay, Dr. Joseph McCullough in The Defender. Inside Florida's bold plan to dismantle school vaccine mandates, Florida announced it will eliminate every school vaccine mandate, making it the first state to fully separate public education from government-enforced vaccinations. Surgeon General Joseph Ladapo described vaccine mandates as oppressive, declaring that only parents, not the state, should decide what goes into their child's body. Families will gain the freedom to send their children to school without facing exclusion for refusing vaccines, restoring control over personal medical decisions, which is great. Well done, Florida.
Yeah. Well, this came out in early September, Polly. We've covered this. This is a piece from Mercola. And what it's really emphasizing is that this is not an aberration. This is actually restoring informed consent and medical freedom. Of course, no mandate is observing informed consent and informed refusal. You have to have the right to say no. And effectively, even with religious exemptions, you don't have an unfettered right to say no. You should not have to have a religious reason to say no to unwanted medicine. There's really good constitutional precedence for this. And I really love what Surgeon General Ladapo said back at this press conference in early September, that any mandate drips with disdain and slavery. It basically says that the state knows better than the parents of these young children what is right for their bodies. It's the state knows better than the doctor. The state knows better than anybody, as if you're the property of the state. We are not property of the state, and our Constitution, thankfully, notes our natural rights from the Creator, and the state is obliged to respect them and not trample on them. And all these vaccine mandates, in fact, have been trampling on the most fundamental right, which is bodily autonomy. So I'm really thrilled. The article points out, Polly, that there are laws that were passed by the Florida state legislature. So the governor and the Surgeon General cannot wave a wand and get rid of all vaccine mandates. This will happen in stages, but they have declared that this is their intent, and that's very important.
Well, staying with Florida, Brenda Belletti, Florida bill would require medical examiners to include recent vaccination history when investigating sudden deaths of infants and children. If passed, the State Bill 188 would allow the state to systematically collect data necessary to determine whether vaccines may be linked to unexpected deaths in young people. This is according to the bill's author, Maya Hahn, the chapter leader for Children's Health Defense Florida. We know Maya well, so well done to Maya for putting that together.
Yeah, very well done to Maya. This is exciting. This is being introduced by State Senator Ileana Garcia. And we know, Polly, that many, if not the vast majority of sudden infant death cases are within a very few days after vaccination. And we know that most SIDS deaths are clustered at the times of so-called well baby visits at 2 months, at 4 months, 6 months, and 12 months. So this is really good. And again, like what we just talked about with getting rid of mandates, I really hope that Florida will set the pace for other states.
Okay, Jill Erzan in The Defender, formal, unequivocal apologies are needed to restore public trust after COVID vaccine mandates. The authors of a new paper in Science, Public Health Policy and the Law contend that vaccine mandates and lack of transparency during the COVID-19 pandemic undermined public trust in health authorities. Dr. Asim Malhotra and Andrea Lamont Nazarenko, PhD, called for formal government apologies, complete data transparency and open scientific debate to restore credibility and repair the damage.
Well, it's hard to disagree with that, Polly. This is one of our friendly, great journals, Science, Public Health Policy, and the Law, edited by John Oler, and Asim Malhotra and Andrea Nazarenko are certainly leaders in the health freedom movement. And they're right that unless there's acknowledgement, apology, transparency, and some kind of accountability, the trust in the public health institutions and in medicine and hospitals will continue to plummet. I see it continuing to plummet, and it's dangerous. The studies are so clear, and this article cites a study from the mainstream Journal of Vaccine from 2022 showing that your risk of hospitalization is 2 to 4 times greater if you got a COVID shot than if you didn't. It cites to a Japanese study of 18 million people that if you get any COVID shot, your risk of death increases. I mean, we know that millions of people have died around the planet from these COVID shots. So it's long overdue. Candidly, Polly, I'm not seeing the reckoning yet on the horizon, and it's deeply troubling to me.
Yeah, I mean, Mary, just having come back from England, a lot of people COVID testing over there, and I'm just like, oh, who does that anymore? But I don't understand, but everyone's like, oh, I just tested positive for COVID. I just, new language to me, because I don't see anyone here in my little community ever even beginning to talk about taking a COVID test. It's what it is, I guess. We've still got some education to do. All right, well, Brenda Belletti in The Defender here. Houston Hospital denies refusing organ transplants to unvaccinated patients. Houston Methodist Hospital denied allegations by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton that the hospital may still be imposing COVID-19 vaccine requirements on transplant patients. The hospital has 14 days to verify its compliance with the state new law banning vaccine-based transplant denials.
So good for Ken Paxton. This is based on a tweet by Mary Talley Bowden. Good for Dr. Bowden. Apparently, the Houston Methodist Hospital, until very recently, was requiring COVID shots for any organ transplants. We wrote many letters over the last 5 years, Polly, to hospitals, telling them that that is a gross violation of medical ethics to refuse and violates common sense. I'm not clear what's going on there. Houston Hospital is now denying it, but Mary Talley Bowden's tweet shows their specific document that says you must have a COVID shot to get a transplant. So we'll see what happens with that.
Michael Nevadakis in The Defender. Germany's top court rules doctors not liable for COVID vaccine injuries. Germany's Federal Court of Justice ruled that the federal or state authorities, not healthcare providers, are responsible for compensating people injured by COVID-19 vaccines. The ruling aligns Germany's system more closely with the US, where vaccine manufacturers and administrators are shielded from liability.
Sadly, Polly, this is no surprise. The whole COVID enterprise, which was absolutely globally planned and executed, it hinges on the idea that neither the doctors nor the government planners nor the vaccine manufacturers will be held to account. And that's explicitly in a statute in the US, the 2005 Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act, the PrEP Act. And they didn't have that law specifically in Germany, but it's no real surprise that their highest court has upheld the idea that doctors are not liable and that you have to go seek compensation from the state. We know what that looks like in our countermeasures program. It's a total kangaroo court. It's really troubling, Polly. Law was turned on its head during COVID worldwide. And one note that's positive in the article is that our friend Renate Holzeisen, who is on the board of CHD Europe, which we've now closed as a separate entity, but Renata has sued in the Court of the European Union for the approval of Costain, the mRNA self-amplifying vaccine. She is challenging that it was approved by the European Medicines Agency. So that's positive. Well, we're going to talk more about a lot of activism in Europe right now.
We are. So this is Michael Novadakis' article in The Defender. So Maha goes global. US inspires Make Europe Healthy Again movement. The Make Europe Healthy Again, which is MIHA or MAHA, depending how you want to say that, initiative to tackle Europe's rising chronic disease crisis. It launched Wednesday at the European Parliament, backed by medical experts, policymakers, Children's Health Defence, and other advocacy groups. MIHA will promote preventative health and individual autonomy and national sovereignty. And we did stream that event on CHD.
We did.
You go to
Yes.
our page if you want.
And I know that our friends and colleagues in Europe are very grateful for that we've made this available. I think this is important, Polly. COVID was a global operation. We have to understand this, that it was globally executed, planned and executed by governments, particularly in Western Europe and the United States. So now uniting with people in Europe, with former legislators, current legislators, doctors, scientists, lawyers, it's important for us to show this global solidarity, to challenge what happened during COVID, and to depoliticize science, right? To ensure individual choice and to honor human dignity. And so Bobby Kennedy, as Secretary of HHS, gave a videotaped statement there. But many of our friends, Asim Malhotra, Louis Fouché, Maria Hubner-Mogg, Dr. Robert Malone, many people spoke in the European Parliament earlier this week, and that was terrific.
Fantastic. Okay, the US Right to Know in The Defender. Everyday chemicals in plastic, pesticides, cookware are linked to higher prostate cancer risk. A new review of nearly 500 studies found that chemicals in everyday products like plastics, pesticides, and cosmetics, and non-stick cookware can disrupt hormones and raise the risk of prostate cancer. Researchers warn that even low levels of exposure to these chemicals may act as prostate carcinogens, worsening the disease severity. And you know, prostate cancer, like breast cancer, on the rise.
Yeah. It says here, Polly, that 1 in 8 men in their lifetime will face prostate cancer, particularly older men, but it is like breast cancer for women. And so it's very susceptible to endocrine disrupting chemicals. And they note here that's really BPA and PFAS, or forever chemicals. And the advice in the article that I think is, great advice for all of us is use glass, stainless steel, or ceramics for food, and avoid Teflon. Definitely PFAS is from Teflon. Choose organic food when you can, and use non-toxic cleaning products. I think that that's really good advice in order to minimize our contact with these endocrine disrupting chemicals.
Yeah, definitely on the cleaning products.
Yeah, I just need to refill my big bottle of white vinegar. There really are, between baking soda and vinegar, you really are in good shape to do household cleaning. You really are.
Excellent. Okay, so Brenda Belletti, Defender, on the back of digital slaves, Musk and other Trump-era tech elites are building global digital control grids. The Technical News founder, Patrick Wood, explained how key figures in the Trump administration are developing a system for total digital control over global society. Wood's presentation was one of the 4 at the recent Omnivore Symposium that analysed the dangers of technocracy. And we did cover this on Financial Rebellion on Thursday, for those that missed it.
Oh, great. Yeah, so we have on CHD TV Omnivore 1, 2, and 3, and each one is really fantastic, Polly. These are fantastic seminars, really helping us understand the bigger picture. And this last one, Omnivore 3, has this initial presentation that Brenda Belletti ably wrote up here, but that the digital control grid hinges on using AI and blockchain technology, and that the digital universe that the US government is pushing, right, to be ahead of any other country in artificial intelligence. It hinges on unifying data that includes not only all health data, but geospatial data, i.e., where are you at any time, period in time. And that is going to require a biometric ID, which is based on DNA. And they're already talking about any scientific institution that gets federal funding is going to require a biometric ID with DNA. So this is really, really troubling. As Bobby Kennedy used to say when he was at CHD, government, you cannot trust any government, regardless of political bent. You cannot trust any government with total control, because at some point it will be abused by someone. And so he famously said at the Defeat the Mandates, every right that you have can be transformed into a privilege if a government actually has total control. And so this is definitely something that we are covering and are very concerned about, because the digital control grid is part of what this administration has articulated is something that they absolutely want to advance.
Well, we've just contacted Sandy Marcus from UK Column News to try and get her on CHD TV. She was just reporting that they're saying to the schools, come on, parents, we're going to give you this free service. We're going to test all of these kids' eyes, and they're collecting the biometric data on the children. And it's not just in England, it's also happening in America as well. So I'm going to get her on to do more on that for us all.
Yeah,
Who would
great.
think?
I mean, Polly, this is already completely rolled out in China. It's completely rolled out in India. It's pretty rolled out in Nigeria. This is not new. And so we in the US are sort of the laggard, and it's very troubling. The UK has just said, Keir Starmer has just said that if you don't have a biometric ID, you will not be able to work. That's a pretty stark statement. So this is a big issue that we definitely have to reckon with.
We do, but as I said on Thursday on Financial Rebellion, I met some wonderful young men in their 20s who shocked me by saying, we're not having any of it. We're not having any of the digital ID. We're not going to do it. And I was just so pleased to see that.
Yeah, but it's, well, that's great.
Yeah, but I know we've got more work to do. All right, well, Brenda Belletti here in The Defender. Journal faces lawsuit over discredited study used by GSK, which is GlaxoSmithKline, to market dangerous antidepressants for teens. The study, published by the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry in the journal, actually found that paroxetine, known as Paxil, was neither safe nor effective. Internal documents later showed that GSK hired a PR firm to ghostwrite the article, cherry-picking data and recruiting 20 co-authors to lend credibility. The company then used the paper to market Paxil to doctors. That's shocking.
If you only read one article this week, read this one by Brenda Belletti, who's so fantastic on our Defender staff. So this is a fantastic lawsuit, but it really shows you what drives pharma, and no shock, it's the money. They really literally don't care about children's health. So let me just go into a little bit more depth here. This is a lawsuit being brought by an attorney who has been representing families of children who committed suicide while they were taking Paxil. And this has been filed in the DC Superior Court, the local court, to retract this article that was published in this journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. It was published 24 years ago, Polly. It was published in 2001. And basically, the first studies that were done on Paxil in adolescents and children showed unambiguously that it was harmful and that it caused suicidal ideation. But GSK, that makes Paxil, then cherry-picked the studies. They hired these ghostwriters, as you said. They hired 20 co-authors for credibility, including some guy at Brown University named Keller. So they called it the Keller article. And then they put it on the market, and they made $1 billion right away, right? And then in 2012, 11 years after they put this article out, they paid $3 billion in a criminal fraud allegation to the Department of Justice for Paxil and other drugs. In 2015, the British Medical Journal reanalyzed this study and showed that it was completely manipulated and that there were terrible dangers to kids from Paxil, and GSK did nothing. It's pretty clear, according to Dr. David Healy, a psychiatrist who's been involved in this and a friend to CHD, he says it's pretty clear that the journal was complicit with GSK. And so it's like none of the institutions, the doctors, the journal, the drug company, none of them really care about the kids. They care about making money. And it is shocking. It's just shocking. But it shows it's so important for us to understand this. It's not just about the vaccines. It's about this mindset that they will again and again and again lie to people and put profits above health, including children's health. So anyway, I thought it was a great article by Brenda and well worth reading.
Okay, back in the Defender, scientists say the World Health Organization reviews downplay risks linked to cell phone radiation. Recent reviews commissioned by the World Health Organization on the effects of wireless radiation provide no assurance of safety, according to a published report by the International Commission on the Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Fields. The group said the reviews exclude key studies and rely on weak or mismatched data. More corruption.
This one's no surprise, but this independent group says that, the World Health Organization is bought by telecom. And we know, having won a judgment against the U.S. Federal Communications Commission in 2021, they still haven't done it. And we won it that they don't have adequate health guidelines for radiation. They still don't. They've done nothing. We're after them for that. We're on this case, but it's deeply troubling. Again, same thing. It's putting money ahead of health. And literally not even understanding what the effects are. So it's troubling.
It's countdown to our conference, Mary. How are we doing? I hear we're nearly sold out.
We are nearly sold out. Literally today, October 19. If you want to come to the conference, please go sign up right now, because we are going to sell out. And we kind of have to close the number of people and tell the hotel exactly how many it is this coming week. So if you're interested, and it is going to be amazing. And let me just tell you the latest sign up. So you already know so many of the luminaries, the two senators, Ron Johnson, Rand Paul, Surgeon General Joe Latipo, Russell Brand, all of those amazing people that you see there on the screen. But the latest signups are Dr. Dave Weldon, who was Secretary Kennedy's nominee to lead the CDC. And last but not least, Cheryl Hines, the comedian, and she is going to be doing the dinner with Russell Brand on Saturday night. So it's going to be an amazing weekend. Really inspiring speakers, great panels, great keynotes. It is also available online. I know that not everybody can get away. Not everybody can pay for the airfare and the accommodations and all that goes into getting to a conference. It's a lot. So it's $77 to watch online live, and then you can save it for watching later. So I really recommend, if you want to, the next best thing, if you can't come in person, is to sign up to watch it online. And I do think that that's going to be a really great experience too.
I'm really excited. I did not know Dr. Dave Weldon was coming to the conference. I love him. He's such a wonderful.
Yeah, he's coming and he's excited to be there. He's going to be giving a keynote. I mean, it's really going to be an incredible conference, Polly. It really is. I'm just thrilled. Candidly, we weren't quite sure back in August when we really went out with this. But in the last month, it's just sort of the momentum has just been gathering, and it is going to be genuinely a really fantastic conference.
It certainly is. Well, that's exciting. All right, well, hopefully we'll see lots of you there.
We are in our fall $1 million match month, and we are incredibly great. We have $1 million that donors have put aside to say, we have put this money in with the understanding and expectation that your donors will meet this. And so I really urge you, if you possibly can, to help us meet this $1 million match before we get to the conference. It will make a big difference. It is expensive to put on a conference, and we would be incredibly grateful for anything that you can do.
We're very grateful for all of the money because it keeps us going, keeps being able to go live, and the defender to write truth so we can report on that.
Exactly.
And legal team, IMR team,
Right.
Brilliant science team.
Yeah, we're doing a lot, but it does cost money to have people be able to do this. Full time means that we have to pay people so that they have livelihoods to support themselves and their families. So if this is valuable, what we do is valuable to you, then we're so grateful if you can support us in some way. And if you can become an insider, that's either $10 a month or $150 for the year. That does give you certain privileges that are really cool. You get to save the CHD TV to your own folder. You get to save Defender articles. You get to come to the once a month up close events that are really interesting and fun, sort of a deeper dive into some of what we're doing. So something to think about.
Yeah, and even if everyone just gave $1, 1 million people gave $1, we'll have done it. And our views show that we get that amount out there, so we can do this. And because sometimes people think, oh, I just don't have any money, but I could give you $5, or everything counts.
Everything counts. And $5 is great. $5 once a month, that makes a huge difference for us, Polly.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone, and all those that support as well. We really truly appreciate you.
Absolutely.
And it's so important that we just fact check everything that's out there right now, because I had to stay in a hotel while I was away for one night. Honestly, the mainstream news is a joke. It's ridiculous.
It is. It's really true, Polly. Yeah, and it doesn't really matter which channel you go to. Pharma is supporting all of it. They don't pick a team. They support anybody and everybody so that their message dominates. And it's so true.
Yeah, so that's why we've got to keep doing what we're doing. Well, so to everyone out there, we're truly grateful. Have a lovely rest of a Sunday for you all, and I'll see you tomorrow morning. And Mary and I'll be back next week.
Pray big, stand firm, never settle.
Correct. We've also got a big problem, and I can't tell you how many people have found the same problem I've got. This year, it has been nigh on impossible to grow food. Our soil is not coping with that. I don't know what is going on, but people are really struggling to grow food like we used to be able to.
We're hearing from people all over the world with that exact scenario, all over the world. So it's not hard to figure out when we know we've been exposed to literally toxic rain for decades, becoming ever more toxic as they continue to ramp these programs up. And the UV radiation is absolutely off the scale. And this is a harbinger of how prone people are to believe the official narrative over even what they can feel with their own senses. The sun is incredibly intense on skin, surfaces, it's burning foliage, because climate engineering is the single greatest factor destroying the ozone layer. It's not hairspray cans. They contain bad elements. Yes, CFCs are bad, yes. But comparing that to climate engineering is to compare an ant to an elephant. Climate engineering is destroying the ozone layer, and the government is simply lying about the UV readings. They're a completely fictitious reading. We're getting UVC in the surface. That's a DNA damaging spectrum of UV radiation. So in addition to the toxic rain that's killing root systems and soil microbiome, Polly, we have this incredibly intense UV radiation from our collapsing ozone layers, near functional collapse right now, by the way. And that causes plants from forests to crops. They shut their stomata. They can't breathe. They're not absorbing CO2. They're not releasing oxygen. They're just simply zombie plants, zombie trees at this point. They're just dormant, trying to hang on. And again, you can't throw this kind of a wrench into the incredibly complex web of life without catastrophic consequences, and we're seeing that now.
In regard to the ability of the planet's life support systems to feed populations, which you alluded to earlier, we are very close to losing our ability to grow food. What we're seeing already, and I just toured some of the agricultural regions in California, and the sun scorch is incredibly evident. In fact, some orchards are being torn out of the ground because the trees are so fried. They're very misshapen. The branches are misshapen. The trees, the leaves themselves are mutated looking. On the perimeter of some of the orchards, I believe almonds in particular, they're spraying a chemical to coat the leaves to try to protect them from this massive UV because the perimeter trees are most exposed. And again, we're seeing a horrific amount of damage on the foliage as a whole. And this is, again, on top of the unprecedented drought that now statistically is the worst in 1,200 years based on paleo data. That's not being admitted to either. This is in addition to the soil contamination from the toxic heavy metals and polymers that are coming down in precipitations, which lab tests prove. This is not speculation. And we know in the case of aluminum that when root systems are exposed to bioavailable aluminum, they shut down nutrient uptake, they die a slow, protracted death. But the bottom line is, even if we looked at the UV issue alone and we ignored everything else, that issue alone is very rapidly diminishing our ability to produce food. Is that correct, Ray?
That's absolutely correct. And what a lot of people don't realize is that most of our oxygen comes from plankton.
Correct.
Okay? And the UVB, UVC penetration in the ocean is much deeper than scientists ever imagined. They've measured UVB down to 15 meters, Dane. When that gets into the plankton, and you've seen the reduction in plankton, you've seen the reduction in krill, you've seen our coral reefs, and you more so than the average human, you understand what's happening. They have suffered a death that people just don't get yet. Over 66% of our oxygen comes from plankton. So if we reduce the ability to make oxygen to begin with, plus we're doing the geoengineering to the atmosphere, our ozone layer is not going to last at all. It's going to be gone.
In regard to the die-off of plankton, Ray, that you so accurately describe and the ramifications that are so incredibly grave, we are on the fast track to what would be termed Canfield Ocean, a superheated, oxygenless, lifeless, stratified dead zone in the oceans. Again, that's known as Canfield Ocean. You've communicated to Professor Canfield directly, have you not? And what were the results of those communications?
Professor Canfield has done extensive research in the South Pacific. And because of the Canfield Ocean effects, I wanted to know how much UV radiation metrology they've performed during their research projects. And they do have a person with the research staff that is an expert with that, and they're planning on using more technology to measure and get data in the South Pacific area where his current research project is going on. And I hope to see that, but this is past tense. What we have in the oceans right now is something, no matter what happens to the ozone layer, it can't fix the oceans, Dane.
I'm Kathy Sinnott, and I'm here in Ireland, in Cork.
And you've done so much work. We need about 10 hours to cover everything that Kathy is done.
I've just been around for a long time.
But you have. It's people. You have to know this. This lady has done so much for our children. Okay, let's talk about Jamie.
Okay, Jamie is 39. He has profound autism. He's nonverbal. He's got a mild cerebral palsy, severe epilepsy, and he lives at home. He's just actual heart of our family. And he became this way. He was perfectly normal for his first 4 months until he got his first vaccine, which would have been diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, plus polio. And at that point, he went from being just a colicky baby to screaming the high-pitched wail. I just remember him with his little kind of baby hands pushing and pushing at his head and screaming and screaming. And when the screaming died down, he had lost all of his skills, even being able to hold up his head. You know, at that stage, he'd been moving around, using his foot to propel himself around. And all through then his childhood, he had a cousin that was 4 days older. So we always had this comparison. And they had been together the whole way, and then the cousin zoomed off and Jamie lost everything. But
What sort of age was it that he did have this reaction from DPT?
4 months.
4 months.
It was
okay.
his first DPT.
Right.
But we didn't know. We just thought, you know, well, he's kind of just crying so much that he can't do things, or, you know, we made a lot of excuses. And that summer, my father, who's a doctor, was over in Ireland for the summer, and he said there's something wrong with him, and had him admitted to hospital. And with a week of, you know, hospital examinations, they discovered he was incredibly healthy, but he just wasn't doing anything. He was unresponsive. He was, you know, had no skills, no ability to hold up his head or anything, which by then he was 7 or 8 months, so he should have been able to sit. He couldn't do anything. And at the very end of a week's stay in hospital, the consultant, Professor Barry, said to me, I said, well, he said, we don't know what it is. And I said, is there any ideas? And he said, well, I really can't think what it could be, but I wouldn't discount autism. Now, it was the first time in my life I ever heard that word. It was so rare at that time. And when I went home and told my dad, he said, autism. I heard of it once. I don't know what it is, but I'm pretty sure it's something you don't. Oh, and he said, the professor had said, I wouldn't rule out autism. And I said, well, what do we do? And he said, well, you watch it develop. And so my father, when I was talking to him, he didn't know anything about autism, but he said, the only thing I think I remember is it's the kind of thing you don't let develop. So we headed off to America and got some help there. But I want to backtrack a little bit before I tell you the next thing. And that's that after this happened to Jamie, he got his second dose and his third dose of DPT. And in those days, they were done 2 months apart. And I look back and I think, why did I keep vaccinating? It was so clear. Why didn't I see it? And a little bit of history. When in the 50s, I was born in 1950, and when I was a child, the whole polio epidemic was raging, and, you know, incredible scaremongering. And I happened to live in Oak Park, which was the home of a doctor who some vaccine people would know the name of, Dr. Herbert Ratner. He was the public health official in Oak Park, Illinois. And he stood against the Salk vaccine. He would not allow the Salk vaccine into Oak Park. And when they were forcing it, he said, not unless people hear both sides. And it was a very brave thing, because it was Dr. Ratner really against the whole United States. But my father had been a student in medical school and had huge respect for Dr. Ratner. So we did not get the Salk vaccine. And my own sister was dragged in front of the classroom. I wasn't in school yet, but she was dragged in front of the classroom, and the teacher told everyone not to play with her because she wasn't vaccinated. So it was quite cruel. So several years later, I was much older, and Dr. Sabin himself sent us the vaccine. And so we got the drops, we got the Sabin vaccine and avoided the Salk vaccine. But the effect of this on me was to trust that vaccines were safe, because heroic doctors like Dr. Ratner were there to stop bad vaccines. So if there was a vaccine that had been there for a long time, surely somebody like Dr. Ratner would have had it pulled. And so I had incredible faith in vaccines, and my father gave vaccines. I mean, there weren't very many in those days. I mean, I had very few vaccines in my life. And so I had this trust. So when that happened to Jamie, my first thought wasn't, it was the vaccine he had the other day. You know, I mean, now I think, how did I not see it? It was, well, I know he's colicky, you know, something, right? And then, of course, when we started to look up autism, you know, in the summer, when he was about 6-7 months old, and the word autism had been used, what did we find? Bettelheim, refrigerator mothers. So rather than looking at the fact that he had just been vaccinated before all this happened, I'm beating myself up about having dropped the emotional football somehow. I mean, I was a 24/7 mom, breastfeeding and everything else, and I'm telling myself, you know, you must have emotionally damaged him in some way that he became autistic. And that lasted for years, you know, even we didn't have the internet in those days, and Bettelheim was pretty influential. Now, so when we went to so my other kids wound up getting vaccinated as well.
How many children do you have?
I have 9 children.
9?
9, yes.
Okay.
But Jamie was my third. So, and there weren't a lot of vaccines then, but they got them. So when we went to America to get help for Jamie, my oldest was 7, and he had measles. You know, I'd had measles, he'd had measles. Measles was just something you got. And, but he had to have a piece of paper saying he had the single measles vaccine to go into school, and I needed him to go to school so I could be taking Jamie to get help at Michael Reese Hospital in Chicago with a wonderful team who were just wonderful. But so within a month, the school is contacting me, you know, so he got his vaccine the night before school starts, goes to school, and a month later they contact me and say, he's so off the wall, he can't be in with other children. And I'm like, what? My nice, gentle, friendly, lovable son who's been in school in Ireland and had no problems at all, he suddenly can't be around any other children. So they sent a home tutor to our house who came 2 or 3 times a week. And I would come home from the hospital with Jamie from his sessions, and the tutor was saying to me, I'm really struggling to teach him his letters. And I'm sitting there thinking, he can read, he can write cursive. What do you mean he can't learn his letters? But I'm busy with Jamie, and I'm putting this in the back of my mind thinking, I'll see this later. I'll think about this. So when we got back to Ireland, sure enough, he couldn't read anymore. He couldn't write anymore. Forget cursive. To this day, he still can't write cursive. And I have notebooks full of his little 7-year-old cursive writing. So he wound up in remedial school. They had to make an exception because his IQ was so high. And he struggled through school, you know, wonderful verbally, but couldn't read a sentence. He could stare at the page of Lord of the Rings and know everything that happened. But if you asked him to read one sentence, he couldn't do it. He couldn't string the words together. So we struggled through school. And then at 16, again in America, getting help for Jamie, his younger brother, I brought him to a developmental optometrist who discovered that the whole visual pathway, which is of course where the measles virus works, had been totally distorted. And so the reason he hadn't been able to read or write anymore was because he couldn't, unless he was very motivated, he couldn't make the very difficult compensation to read and write. And so he struggled a lot, the older brother, he struggled a lot very strict diets and things, he's regained a lot. But back to Jamie. So again, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing that the vaccine he had the night before, single measles, the night before going to school, did that to his older brother. And I'm chugging away with Jamie. And his service here in Cork demanded he have a hepatitis vaccine. Now, we already knew Jamie was having petit mals, from the workups he'd had in America. He was already on epileptic medication, but they insisted he have hepatitis. Again, I have this incredible trust that there would be a Dr. Ratner there who would have stopped that vaccine if it were bad, so it must be good. And he had the hepatitis vaccine and develops the visual seizures, where they had always been invisible, just in his brain waves. Now he's falling on the floor and having convulsions and things. Again, I don't see it. So it carried on, and several of my children have been affected by vaccines in a lesser or greater way. But again, I just chugged on until the question really rose with me when my youngest child was a baby. She was breastfed, she slept with me, I was with her all the time, and 4 nights in her first months, she had an evening where she would just stop breathing. Just gently, she had no cold, no flu, nothing. She just couldn't breathe. And she didn't struggle, she just stopped breathing. And this happened over and over again. And the first time it happened, I rang the midwife who had delivered her, very healthy baby, and she said, take it. I said, I can't even bring her to hospital because by the time they get there, she'll be breathing again. They'll just think I'm crazy. And she said, no, take it very seriously. Sit up in bed, put her on your chest, and keep her breathing with you, and don't fall asleep until you're happy it's over. So I did that, and about 2 or 3 in the morning, it was over. She was fine. But I remember saying to the midwife, I just had her to the doctor. So the next time it happened, same thing, rang the midwife again. She said, look, do the very same thing. And I said, I don't understand her. I just had her at the doctor and she was perfect. Got her through the night again, about 2 or 3 in the morning. It all passed. She was fine. We both went to sleep. It happened twice more. And one of the first of the times, I remember thinking, I just had her at the doctor, and the penny is beginning to drop because she was so healthy. The only reason she went to the doctor was for her vaccine. So about 2 or 3 days after the third time, the third shot, the third time, she had another episode, more minor. And years later, talking about this with the midwife, she said, that's how cot deaths happen. If she hadn't been sleeping with you, if she hadn't been breastfed, if you hadn't, been able to notice and watch her, that's how it happens. They just slip away. They don't struggle. They just slip away. So I began to admit to myself, it's the vaccine, and that was the 2-in-1. She didn't even have the 3-in-1 because her brother had epilepsy. So a few months later, just before she was due for her MMR, Jamie had been given a flu vaccine. Again, big pressure to have it, and this was before this happened to my baby. And I'd gotten him a flu vaccine, for only one that ever happened to any of us in my house. I went ahead and got it, all the ads on television, everything, especially that the disabled should have it. So he was in pretty good shape for him, which would be our sick is his well. Brought him for his flu vaccine in the evening. Came home, the next morning he couldn't even lift his head off the pillow. He was so sick with the heaviest flu, but it was all at once. He hadn't developed the flu. He was just completely like the worst section of a flu. And that flu continued like in waves. He was never well, but he got worse and better, worse and better, worse and better, until he finally was in hospital with double pneumonia and just having fits all the time. And I'm sitting in hospital with double pneumonia. I came home from hospital one day, having spent the whole day by his bed. He's really, really sick. And my father had given me an old physician's desk reference, one of these big Bible-sized books. And I just looked up the flu vaccine. And there were a lot of different ones. But all of them said the same thing: not to be given to people with unstable neurological conditions. And I thought, they're telling everyone to bring disabled children and elderly people in for their flu vaccine. And yet, by definition, most of them have unstable neurological conditions, and my son had epilepsy. So one of the very first contraindications, no doctor had obviously read. No health official had read. So there he's lying in hospital, you know. I won't say it was life-threatening, but it could have been very close. And that was the last vaccine that was ever allowed in my house, and it spared my little daughter from getting the MMR. And finally, over 2 years, he went from being his disabled self to being in a wheelchair, weighing 65 pounds. He's 5'5" tall, 65 pounds, dying because his gut no longer could absorb any nutrients. He was in hospital in Dublin for a long time, and finally I kept begging them for a colonoscopy, which they wouldn't give him.
Did they say why they wouldn't give it to him?
No, but they finally did an endoscopy. And they told me while he was in recovery that if he wasn't put on a feeding program, he would die. We were going to lose him. And I said, I know, that's what I'm here for. We'll do anything, any kind of feeding program. So he said it to me 3 times. And then I was sent down to the room to wait for Jamie, who was still up in recovery. And the doctor, a nurse, and 2 young doctors came down to the room and sat down and said, we've been talking about Jamie. His quality of life is poor. Your quality of life is poor. We've decided not to put him on a feeding program. In other words, we've decided he's going to die. So I just waited till the next morning because I couldn't get him out when he was so groggy and everything. Packed him back to Cork, found this wonderful consultant, Professor Quigley, who gave him the colonoscopy, took the pictures, went all the way up to the terminal ileum, and his condition was so advanced that, you know, the nodules you see on Andrew Wakefield's, at this stage, his gut was just smooth. There was no cilia in parts of it. It was ulcerated in some parts and just smooth, like the walls were smooth. There was nothing to grab the nutrients anymore. So it was so far beyond the nodules at that stage. So that was when he was about 20, he's 39. We've spent the last 19 years just perfecting his diet and perfecting his diet and perfecting his diet. He's basically ketogenic with A2 cream, A2 milk cream, and all sorts of things. But he's much healthier. And 2 years ago, he finally broke the communication barrier, and with his finger, very painstakingly, he can communicate. And guess what? He can spell the most complicated words. It takes him so long to do a little message, which then is typed on an iPad. But all of his messages are, Mommy, are you resting? You know, pray for Carmen. Can we say the rosary tonight? Mark was good today, one of his tutors. And I asked him, was there a message for all of you? You know what his message was? Tell them to have a nice time in Ireland.
Oh, that's a wonderful message.
He's an absolutely beautiful human being who has suffered every minute of his life since he was 4 months old and got his first vaccine. And you know, it's criminal.
It's criminal.
But he's wonderful.
Can you please tell him we've had the most wonderful time in Ireland?
I will tell
and
him
we're going
that.
to come back.
I will email him and tell him that.
Please tell him that we have
because he
had
far
the best.
prefers now for me to tell him by email than
I love
to
him.
tell
What
him.
a wonderful... It's tragic.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely tragic. And I remember something one of the doctors said at a DAN conference. And he said, one of the terrible things, aside from the destruction of lives, the misery that's caused, the pain, the sheer amount of pain. One of the terrible things is that they rob families of a normal, loving family life. And like when Jamie became autistic, it was so rare. As I say, I never had even heard the. And anytime I'd say to somebody he has autism, they always thought I meant artistic. That doesn't happen anymore. Everyone knows someone who has autism. But I've spent all these years trying to figure out why they let it continue. And you know, I've gone past thinking it's just money. And not just money, but it's not just the money they make, but the money that it will cost to let the truth get out. I mean, obviously that is part of it. I've toyed with the idea that, especially the HPV, could even be about population control. I mean, what's the big side effect besides killing girls and paralyzing them? It's infertility.
With our boys too.
With boys as well, yes. And I've gotten past, and I've even begun to toy with the idea that it's a big experiment to create a new kind of person, a kind of brain that can deal with the whole computer world. You know, you see, I saw an article just a few weeks ago where the Israeli army has a whole division of people with autism. And their job is to sit in front of computers all day and just look at charts and cityscapes and things, because they will sit there for 10 hours a day and they will notice any tiny little movement, any tiny little change. A job that would drive all of us crazy.
And they can hack into anything.
That's right. And so I sometimes think, is it a big experiment? Is this part of the transhumanism thing? And people like my son are just collateral damage. So all of these thoughts go on. And when you put them all together, it makes more sense than just money or just this or just pride or just... You wonder at different layers, are there different reasons that they are criminally doing this to children?
It's just awful. I can't get over the fact that Jamie's able to type.
Yes, and spell. He spells better than I do.
And also the incredible, we knew this anyway, realisation that there was so much going on inside his brain for him to be able to suddenly just type out long words and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, at one level, I always thought he's trapped. You know, he's in there trapped. And he can't always do it. You know, sometimes he can't get it together to do. And we're trying to work with the RPM stencils so that anybody can talk to him. Not just, you know, because it's very hard. I remember his tutor was saying, okay, put out your hand. And he's doing this, and the tutor's going M, S, and I'm thinking, I can't tell the difference between any of those. And then all of a sudden it came to what should be an E. And all of a sudden he changes directions. And the feeling down my spine of, oh, that's an E! He just changed directions for the first time. 3 times. It is him communicating.
Do you have any unvaccinated children?
No, I don't, because the last one, my baby got the DT, the 2-in-1, just before. I mean, that was the thing that opened me up to, no, this has to have been the vaccine. And then Jamie had his double pneumonia, and I saw it in the physician's desk reference, and I realized they not only there was no heroic Dr. Ratner to stop them, but that they even knew they weren't supposed to give it to him, and they'd given it to him, or to all these other people with neurological problems. And at that point, that was it. And I started to speak out. In fact, Jamie has a landmark case in the Irish courts for the right to education, because they refused him education. And in the story, in the judgment, the judge records that he was vaccine damaged, or that I report he was vaccine damaged. So there's actually a high court decision that was never appealed that part was never appealed, saying that I told, that the judge accepts that I say he was vaccine damaged.
So in you've had so many years of experience fighting this on behalf of all our children. I wish if they'd listened to Jamie's story in the first place, I don't think any of our children would be damaged at all.
Well, I'd like to think that, but it doesn't work that way, because, some people listen and some people don't listen. And some people, it doesn't matter. I mean, Jamie has cousins who have known all their life he's vaccine damaged, who are now vaccinating their children.
I mean, if the authorities had listened
Oh,
to you
yes.
and dealt with the vaccine that had damaged your boy. I didn't mean the people.
Yeah, no, that's right.
So what?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about that. I remember getting in touch with the Irish Medicines Board to report Jamie's vaccine damage and some other vaccine damage for some of my other kids. And I rang them up and I said, I want to report this. And they said, but you can't. They said, are you a doctor? I said, no. And they said, well, are you a nurse or are you whatever? They went through the list of acceptable people. And I said, no, I'm the eyewitness, And they said, I said, I'm the mother. And they said, well, you can't report it. Of course, no doctor was going to report it. So they said, no, you can't report it. And so I said, but I'm the eyewitness. And I said, what if it were a car accident? Like, can you imagine the police going around saying, we can't talk to any eyewitnesses? We can only talk to mechanics. So they said, well, and I said, well, I'm going to write it all down and I'm going to send it to you. So what will you do with my letter? And they said, we will have to put it, well, I said, will you throw it away? And they said, no, we won't throw it away. We'll put it in the invalid file. So we won't read it, but we'll put it in the invalid file. So then I wrote a whole letter to the Irish Medical Times about playing on the idea of the invalid file and the invalid file, that all the invalids were in the invalid file. But that was the way it is. I don't know if it's changed. You cannot report, even though you see it happen.
So so for parents watching now that have got injured children and they're exhausted, they're absolutely exhausted, they've been doing this for years, their children are sick, they can't get any help, same old story, none of that
Same old story, because then they add insult to injury in Ireland because they don't give you proper services and there is no compensation in Ireland, etc., etc.
And no one's made any plans for the future and it's all a mess. But there's a lot of parents that are just trapped at home, literally can't get out. And they're desperate, everyone's desperate to see an end to this. What's your advice from all your years of experience of what do you think the parents should be doing to stop this for other people, which is their main concern?
I think we have to get together. And I know parents kind of group together, but we have to get together in a way that forces the issue. And I know it's a very hard thing to say because everybody's homebound, just as you just said. Everybody's in their own homes, taking care. Like right now, I have people taking care of my 39-year-old son so that I can be here. And it's 7-year-olds. People have 7-year-olds and 12-year-olds and all this. But in some way, we have to get together. We have a minister for health with a brother on the autistic spectrum. We have a minister for health right now who made his name by setting up an autism group. And he is blocking everybody just as much as every other minister for health. And he knows. I mean, there are some health visitors and doctors who are just rabid, but a lot of them aren't. And if you show no sign of weakness, like my youngest grandchild, the health visitor came and they said, no, we're not going to do that. She said, well, I'm not here to make you. That's okay. Had they said, we'll think about it, or, she'd have pushed, and made them feel like they had to do it. But the very fact that they were confident, no, thank you, goodbye. Then she just passed on to the next item, was I'll be back in a few months to check their ears or do something like that. And so I think being confident in your stand is a big thing. One of the problems here in Ireland is that parents are beginning to worry about the children's services. And we have secret courts, we have in-camera courts, and a parent will be threatened with being the custody of their children if they don't vaccinate. And there have been cases of that. And it's not like mandatory, but it's like child welfare services threatening. And I've been involved in a couple of cases this way. And you can't bring them out in the open because the courts are all in camera. So they're secret. So it's kind of a creeping mandatory sort of thing, a creeping threatening thing. But I think even in those cases, you just have to surround yourself, never be alone with a health worker, always have other people there who are maybe more confident than you are. Maybe when you're talking to a health worker, get chatting about your cousin who's a barrister or whatever, just drop whatever and have them back off. But it is getting more and more threatening. It's getting much harder.
Is there anything else you want to tell the peeps? People are listening to you, they love you, they think you're amazing.
Well, I just want to tell them one story.
Please
because
do.
he's one of my heroes. I mentioned at the beginning Dr. Herbert Ratner, who stood up against all of the powers that be during the height of the polio hysteria and said the Salk vaccine is dangerous. And the morning that he was being brought in to a panel to lose his job as public health officer, the front page of the national papers and the Chicago Tribune or whatever was that the vaccine was being withdrawn. And that saved his job by literally hours. But he was an amazing man. And one thing nobody didn't understood, at 92 years of age, he went to a conference where Dr. Carboni was presenting about bone cancer. These bone cancers that were becoming very, very common, rare bone cancers that were becoming very common. So at 92, he traveled to wherever this conference was. And at the break, he went over and got Dr. Carboni and said, I have something I think you're going to want. And he made him promise. Dr. Carboni was in Chicago and he was in Oak Park, which is the first suburb west of Chicago. He made him promise that he would call to his house. And Dr. Carboni was a very busy doctor and he was like, because he was 92, he said yes. So for the next few weeks, Dr. Carboni's back in Chicago feeling guilty about not dropping in on this old guy's house. And eventually at his lunch hour one day, he drives over to Oak Park, knocks on his door. Dr. Ratner says, I'm so glad you came. And he walks slowly down to a freezer in his basement and came up with 5 vials of original Salk vaccine that he had had in the freezer for over 40 years and wouldn't release until he found a doctor that would know how to use them. And the thing was, Dr. Carboni and his team had been finding simian virus in all of this big epidemic of bone cancers. The one thing they found in all the tumors was simian virus. And they were pretty sure it had come from the Salk vaccine, but they had no way of finding it because all the drug companies, all the public health officials and all said there's none of it left. We don't have any in our freezers. There's no samples left. And Dr. Ratner, there's a little article about him. See his picture.
Bring it a bit closer.
Okay.
How are you spelling his name?
Ratner. He used to have a magazine called Child and Family. Dr. Ratner had 5 sealed vials. Every single one of them was full of simian virus that matched the virus in the cancers and that was being passed on in the DNA to the next generation. And it was proof positive that it had come from the Salk vaccine. And that's the kind of hero he was. But as I say, in my case, it had the opposite effect of making me trust some doctor was there protecting us. So, but a great man, a great kind of forgotten man, but a great man.
You really should do like a weekly YouTube live or Facebook
I have
live.
a weekly radio show already.
You do? Okay.
I do on
Where is it?
EWTN.
People would love to listen to it.
Well,
Where is
it's
it?
on EWTN. It's interviews with all kinds of people, mostly on religious topics.
Okay, well, so how do people, how do they get to it?
Well, if
Just
they're in
Google
the
it,
US,
Just Google it.
if they're in, it's called Celtic Connections, and it's played and replayed 3 times every weekend.
It's wonderful. Okay, but still do think about doing Facebook Live with questions and answers. Do they absolutely love you?
I don't even do Facebook. But the other
Well,
thing
we
about
have to
Dr.
make you do
Etner,
it. Do something.
I'll tell you one more thing about Dr. Etner. He was the one that started La Leche with the 7 mothers. He's the one that got the 7 mothers to start La Leche League.
We could just ask you questions. They just say they love. They just say they love you. So it's just like hearts
Don't
and
go.
love. It's like we love her.
Well, I love them. And listen, take care of your children and don't vaccinate them.
I
And
mean,
if they
we
are
already have. This lot
vaccinated-
already have. Okay.
Okay. Well, if they have vaccinated, just work on autoimmunity. Just really work on their diet. Love them, hug them, cuddle them. All that's good for the immune system. Give them forget all this sunscreen and things. Give them lots of vitamin D, lots of good food. And, even things like dairy products. A2, unpasteurized raw. Just feed them as well as you can. And love them, be patient with them. And you're going to start seeing they will come a long way.